Everything you didn't know about Joe Rogan. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The SCREENY. Hosting your own podcast for almost a decade usually means the world gets to know everything there is to know about you. Joe Rogan always seems like a pretty open guy, but there are still some things he managed to keep under wraps while hosting Fear Factor and UFC. He's also kept some of his skeletons in the closet during his days on the Joe Rogan Experience, but it's finally time to let them all out. Let's take a look at everything you didn't know about Joe Rogan. Before we reveal some of his best hidden secrets, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Number 10. Isolation Chambers. If you're a hardcore fan of the Joe Rogan Experience, you probably already know where the popular host stands on certain issues. He's a big marijuana advocate, occasional user of psychedelic drugs, an avid hunter, member of the Eat What You Kill movement, and hardcore conspiracy theorist. There's still one pretty crazy thing he supports that most people aren't aware of: sensory deprivation tanks. Rogan is all about exploring the nature of the consciousness, and what better way to do it than floating inside an isolation tank? Salt water surrounding you is heated by the same temperature as your body, and you apparently start feeling nothing after a while. Rogan described this device as the most important tool he's ever used for developing his mind. He's so crazy about isolation chambers that he even had the guys at Float Lab design one for him specifically. It might sound like a weird thing to stand by, but it's pretty ordinary in comparison to some of the other stuff he's advocating. Number 9. Disney connection. Joe Rogan became a household name thanks to Fear Factor, but he's been appearing on TV long before landing a hosting gig on the show. He signed a development deal with Disney back in the 90s and secured one of the lead roles on a show distributed by this company. Hardball originally aired on Fox back in 1994, but it wasn't the success story that they were hoping for. It was cancelled after less than 2 months, and 2 of the episodes never saw the light of day. Rogan was supposed to get his big break with the role of the egocentric baseball player Frank Valente, but that never happened. He later described his casting process as weird because studio executives didn't even know if he could act before hiring him. After looking back at its failure, Rogan said Hardball was great on paper, but things fell apart on the way. Fox hired a horrible executive producer with a big ego to run the show, and he destroyed the whole thing. Number 8. Big loss. After failing to get his break with Hardball, Rogan found what he was looking for on NBC. He landed one of the major roles on their sitcom News Radio, after studio executives came to the conclusion Ray Romano just wasn't the right fit. Despite the fact it put him on the map, filming this show was a bittersweet experience for Rogan. The set of News Radio was the place where he met his good friend Phil Hartman, who was murdered by his wife in 1998. The two often discussed Hartman's mental problems, and his buddy even tried to convince him to get rid of his crazed wife a couple of times. The Saturday Night Live veteran didn't want to get a divorce because he loved his kids too much. Rogan was heartbroken just like the rest of Hartman's colleagues after learning his wife gunned him down. He described her as a weirdo and a loser with a coke problem and no prospects, who was jealous of Phil's success. Number 7. The fight that never was. The public always enjoys hearing about a good celebrity beef, but Joe Rogan and Wesley Snipes were about to give them more than a verbal face-off. The Blade star challenged the Fear Factor host to a cage fight back in 2005, but their plans eventually fell through. Snipes only wanted to do it because he was in a bad situation with the IRS at the time, and hopes that he'll make good money by taking part in a crazy pay-per-view fight. He was hoping for a match against Jean-Claude Van Damme at first, but the UFC camp wanted one of their own to take part. Rogan agreed to do it and spent 5 months training for the fight. He felt Snipes wouldn't stand a chance in the ring because he's never had a competitive martial arts match before. We'll never know if he was right because their face-off never came together, and Snipes ended up serving 3 years in federal prison for tax evasion. Number 6. Broken home. Joe Rogan grew up as a child of divorce. His parents split up when he was only 5 and he hasn't heard from his dad ever since. Something tells us he'd like to keep it that way since he never had anything nice to say about his father anyway. The podcast host described him as a very violent, scary guy and said the only thing he remembers about him are brief, violent flashes of domestic violence. Despite the fact he accused his father of being an aggressive person, Rogan said nothing bad happened to him growing up. Being raised in a poor, single-parent household inspired him to do better because he had an overwhelming desire to forge his own path in life. Growing up around a lot of losers, including his dad, helped little Joe figure out he didn't want to be like them because they had no hope and no future. Number 5. Martial arts protege. Joe Rogan became a hero in the eyes of many during his days as a commentator for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Talking about showdowns between MMA champions became easy for him because he's also a fighter with years of experience under his belt. He developed an interest in martial arts in his early teens and said he gravitated towards the sport because it was the first thing that ever gave him hope that he wasn't going to be a loser. Little Joe quickly realized he was right. The popular podcaster was only 14 when he started training in karate and attending taekwondo competitions. He became a lightweight champion at the US Open Championship when he was 19, before going on to earn the title of Massachusetts Full Contact State Champion for 4 consecutive years. All these years of training came in handy when he became the fight announcer. The UFC president Dana White even went on the record saying he's educated more people about mixed martial arts than anyone has in history. Number 4. Odd jobs. Joe Rogan's path to success wasn't linear, and he had to hustle a lot before finding his true calling. He retired from competitions at the age of 21 since it became clear fighting wasn't doing him any favors. The Fear Factor host started suffering from frequent headaches and feared he might have to deal with a lot worse injuries if he kept going down the same road. Going to college felt like a waste of time, and he dropped out shortly after enrolling. After all of his plans fell through, Rogan decided to give stand-up comedy a chance because he couldn't imagine himself working a 9-to-5 job. His friends at the gym and taekwondo school encouraged him to pursue this career because he always made them laugh with his jokes and impressions. Rogan had a hard time making do while working on his stand-up routine and accepted several odd jobs so he could cover his expenses. He taught martial arts, delivered newspapers, drove a limousine, did construction work, and even worked for a private investigator. Number 3. Destroying his rival. Crossing Joe Rogan isn't really the best idea, and Carlos Mencia learns that lesson the hard way after stealing one of his jokes. The two men had a huge face-off on stage at the Comedy Store after Rogan publicly accused the fellow stand-up comedian of plagiarism on his blog. He later uploaded the video of their confrontation online, followed by clips of other comedians who were also victims of Carlos Mencia. His thievery was an open secret in the comedy world, but everyone else was too scarce to call him out because he had a strong connection to Hollywood and Comedy Central. Rogan didn't want to stay quiet, and his courage inspired other comedians to speak out against Mencia. His career was completely destroyed after that, but Rogan claimed he never actually hated Mencia, but he just had to speak his truth. Number 2. Free of charge. Carlos Mencia wasn't the only one whose career suffered after Joe Rogan exposed him at the Comedy Store. Both stars were represented by the Gersh agency, and they ditched the Fear Factor host after the incident. Rogan wasn't too bitter about this because he signed with the William Morris agency 5 minutes later. One thing that hurt more than switching agents was the ban he received from the Comedy Store. He easily found other venues to perform at, but this one had a special meaning to him. Rogan spent 13 years performing at the Comedy Store and never received a penny for his troubles. He did it all free of charge and advertised each of his shows, bringing in the bigger crowd. Rogan even purchased a new sound system for the stand-up club and never asked for anything in return. Their decision to ban him from performing was a low blow, but Rogan eventually came back to the Comedy Store in 2013 to support his buddy Ari Schaefer. Number 1. Embracing Fear Factor. The Fear Factor is one of the biggest success stories of Rogan's career, but he never could have predicted how big it would become. He was considering other options before accepting the hosting gig on the hit game show and started thinking about doing stand-up full-time. His plans changed once the NBC executives started begging him to come on board, but he wasn't too crazy about the idea. Rogan was afraid that the Fear Factor might end up being cancelled after only a few episodes because it seemed like a show no network would want to air. He felt like the audience would complain about some of the content on the show, but still decided to take the leap of faith with NBC. To be fair, Rogan didn't accept this offer to do them a solid. He hoped the observations and anecdotes he obtained while filming the show would serve as amazing material for his stand-up routines. They probably would have if he found any time to perform, since the Fear Factor kept him busy for the next 5 years. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content, and don't forget to check out one of the other 2 videos on your screen.